Hi everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Edge. I am Sarah Evans, partner and head of PR at Zen Media, lucky enough to be that. And I'm sitting here today with Rohit Garewal, who's the CEO of Object Edge. So you've watched this summit all day, and now you get the grand finale with the CEO. We're gonna jump right in, because I think you're probably ready for it. Welcome.
Thank you. Let's go, Sarah.
All right, let's go. So we've heard a lot today from various experts in different industries, but I really want to talk about some trends. We are seeing right now factory output shrinking, according to the Institute for Supply Management. And of course, Goldman Sachs just bumped the likelihood of a recession to 35%. These are things that are impacting manufacturing leaders, right? And we want to start with what is keeping these folks up at night knowing these things are happening?
It's all of the above, right? I mean, I'm laughing because it's not one or the other, right? So just yesterday, and I'll probably reference this a lot, I'm in a meeting about 10 manufacturers locally in the Bay Area and in the Midwest, Kansas. And if you listen to what they're saying as leaders, as CEOs, it's not just one thing, right? If you're the CEO or if you're leading a department, all these things impact you. So I think we're going to dive into all this today, but it's not just one or the other. It's all these things are top of mind, and ultimately running their business as they have to do every day as well. So we can dive into each one, but yeah, it's all of the above.
All right, so we talked about what keeps them up at night, but what about first thing in the morning? I know when I wake up, nerdy as it sounds, I'm looking at headlines and economic forecasting. So when I'm looking at manufacturing specifically, let's talk about this. There are pressures and interest rate fluctuations driving up costs, and we've got a whole host of other things happening. What do you think, what does Rohit do first thing in the morning, and what do you think your peers are doing? So on the flip side, can't sleep, but also what happens when I wake up?
Meditate and work out, but after that, look, there's a lot of noise right now, right? There's a lot of news, and so news and noise and news, they interchange with one another. But at the end of the day, everyone's still got to run their business. So, I mean, again, I think we'll talk about this a little bit, but when I asked the question yesterday to these manufacturers, hey, what are you guys doing about tariffs? What are you doing about tariffs? Now, just let me set the target audience here. So when we're typically working with $1 billion plus manufacturers in my history, right? My group that I was with yesterday is more in the $100 to $500 million manufacturing range. So in that cohort, we're not doing anything. We're not thinking about it. They're thinking about it every day of every minute of every day. But at the end of the day, there's so much uncertainty. They're like, we can't actually make decisions right now. We are going into a bunch of what if scenario planning, and that's what they're working on, right? And and it is a time suck. A lot of their time is going into this what if planning, but at the end of the day, right now, it is still a what if. They're not actually taking any actions because there's really no actions to take on the tariffs, at least for our clients and our colleagues. It's mainly because they don't know what the tariffs are going to be tomorrow or next week or next month.
I liked though when we were off camera, because of course we've been talking about this all day. It's like the game plan of ifs. What are all the things that are happening? You just have to talk about it. It's if this, then that. And are you seeing those scenarios play out? Yeah,
100%. And I think it also depends on how exposed are people, right? Look, so I was talking to a guy does aerospace manufacturing. I mean, the most kind of insulated from all this you can be. Producing stuff for space programs, producing stuff for military defense. And what was interesting was this there's going to be secondary effects. So even if your input costs aren't going up, what they're saying is, well, my competitors whose input costs are going up could potentially lose market share. They're going to come into my market. So now there's going to be more supply in my market, which could drive prices down and have margin impact. So there is no kind of like A to B to C here. The impacts of what our manufacturing base in the United States right now is going through is a bunch of uncertainty and a lot of, like you said, like what if planning. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think we can't even forecast or foresee all the different things that could happen now.
Yeah, if you're watching this right now, it's a different scenario than if you watch this next week, right?
Yep.
All right, well, let's talk about some headlines. A recent CNBC survey found 57% of manufacturers say cost is their biggest headwind. Okay? Is that what you're seeing in your conversations with manufacturing clients, or what would be your top 3 list?
Yeah. Obviously, cost is top of mind right now because of tariffs again. And this is going to be obviously a major theme with our 3 speakers before. Tariffs are coming up a lot. Costs, what we call COGS, cost of goods sold, the things that go into the bill of materials for different manufacturing companies. Ultimately, each one of those is a line item, and it all comes together to build an end product. Now, some bill of materials, cost of goods sold, they are relatively simple. Some have thousands of line items, tens of thousands in one build spec, right? If you're building a rocket, it goes from the screw all the way to, the different type of like heat resistant shields that you need. So point being, so when there are various tariffs, now as of today, right? And again, we're on Thursday, there's a flat 10% tariff on almost every country, and then
newspaper, hold
right, yeah. And like a huge tariff on China, right? So even right now, as it is today, everyone's input costs, if you're sourcing anything outside, is going to go up. Now, if a client decides to, or a manufacturer decides to absorb that cost, that impacts gross margins and ultimately earnings. If they decide to pass along some of those costs, it's probably going to impact sales because it's a really competitive environment. So I think, again, it depends on the customer, and if you're talking about what they're talking about right now, definitely costs, definitely what our reaction are going to be to that cost. But again, I go back to, they don't actually know how their costs are going to change yet. Yeah. And then we were talking about this off camera too, so I might as well bring this up. Manufacturers have this thing called a backlog. And ultimately that's like, hey, this has been sold and booked, and now I've got to fulfill it. Well, when you have a backlog, typically for many manufacturers, that backlog could get fulfilled 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. So now you're signing this backlog at a given price, but when it comes to fulfillment time, when you're actually building everything and shipping it out, what are my costs going to be? So here's one thing that actually is changing. We talked about this yesterday. People are already adding line items to contracts saying that, hey, if I have significant supply chain impacts, and I think right now it's 5% variance than what we're doing right now, our prices get to go up and we have to renegotiate our price. So that is something actually physically happening. That's at the contracting level for backlog that's getting signed to say, okay, I don't know what's going to happen to pricing. I may have to go up.
Well, let's get real. And I'm going to be a little facetious with this question because I know the answer.
Okay.
Who is supposed to be forecasting for this? And if this is a pain point for someone, they've almost missed 4 steps ago.
Yeah. Look, this is like, that's a great question. All right. Look, if I were to say who's contractually supposed to do this, it's a combination of maybe finance, so like a CFO and head of procurement, right? They'd be talking about these things like, all right, we've got to protect ourselves legally, and this is how we're going to do it. So in a lot of organizations, it's the CFO, it's the procurement, depending how big they are. Mm-hmm. Now, these people, him or her, already have a lot on their plate, right? And they're getting bombarded with things that are changing every day. So then it's also, do you have the right partners in the room that are like maybe thinking about these things? Sometimes your software provider for like ERPs might already have this stuff being built in and rolled out. So ideally, you've got someone looking out for you on this, and maybe the CFO or the supply chain have partners that are doing it or employees that are looking at this. At this point, I would also say, we just went through a big supply chain shock with COVID. Mm-hmm. So hopefully a lot of manufacturers are dusting off their COVID playbook because they went through this kind of once in 100-year supply chain shock. They're going through another one right now. I mean, we've now have tariffs like we haven't had since 1909. We just had a health event that hadn't happened in 100 years. So we've got, within 5 years, 2 100-year events happening that are impacting supply chains. So dust off your COVID playbooks, and hopefully we've all learned a lot of lessons from that.
I mean, it's a lot to process.
It is.
I want to throw out this stat. Gartner said that by the end of 2025, 80% of all B2B sales interactions will happen online. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's shocking to you. It isn't to me because I feel like that's the way we work because it's currently at 30%.
Yeah.
For context. There's a disconnect, though, between technology and where we're at to get there. What's happening with that and why?
So read that part again about the 80%.
80% of all B2B sales interactions will happen online. Okay. It's currently at 30%.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit, right?
Take that, Gartner.
I would say, no, Gartner, don't take that.
Don't.
We love you. I would say, so in B2B, it's a journey. So when we think about, just to kind of draw context, when you're in a B2C buy flow, oftentimes you're on Instagram or TikTok, you'll come to a website, you'll ideally be dropped into a purchase flow, make it very easy to check out, and you're done. And then historically on B2C, we compare that buy flow to potentially a retail buy flow where you're walking into a store. And the big buzzwords over the last 10 to 20 years was omni-channel in the retail sense. In B2B, the buying cycle is a lot longer, right? I mean, for most manufacturers, your buy cycle is not one interaction. It is, like for us, we're B2B. Our typical sales cycle is 7 to 9 months. There are dozens, if not hundreds of interactions happening. I will buy into 80% of all interactions will have some digital component, whether it's I'm looking at my quote online, whether I'm doing some research online, whether I'm getting a payment online. I don't think the entire interaction stream, 80%, for 80% of the purchase flows, it's all digital. I'll say,
this is Rohit's hot take on online decisions. So we'll say it one more time for those who may have missed it. Yeah,
I'm going to try to be more articulate than I tried my first time. So the statement said that 80% of all purchases are going to be online. I'll just nuance it that 80% of all purchasing journeys will have a digital component. So the funny thing is, if you actually talk about then what that means to the manufacturer, they're actually kind of identical, because the kind of work that you need to do to have one digital touch point is the groundwork is what's going to lead you to all your digital touch points. And for B2B also, when we think about B2C, we think about the consumer. When you're a manufacturer, you actually have 3 constituents in your buy flow. You have your employees, you have your partners, and then you have your customers. So we talk about 3 different screens for 3 different personas. How is your sales rep going into their CRM and entering their opportunity data? How are they building their quotes in their configure price quote solution? How are they serving that up to partners to get the bill of material pricing, to get the right pricing? How are they then ultimately delivering that to their customers so they can view it? These are going to have some in-person interactions, some Zoom interactions. Well, I don't know why this is Zoom, but you get my point. And obviously some purely digital interactions like an e-commerce site or a partner portal.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the tech stack or the underlying tech to do a lot of those things, minus the in-person side.
Okay.
I was reading, I think last week, about how so many B2B companies with tech partners have been burned because they've had this overpromise, under-deliver scenario.
Yeah.
And they think they're going to change their whole workflow based on some of your hot takes and where we think things are going.
Yeah.
How can these folks plan for what tech to integrate? I mean, we're seeing companies, especially in AI, fly by night, right?
Yeah.
Show up and then 90% are disappearing.
Yeah, well, we haven't even talked about AI yet. This could be the rest of the show if we just talk about this. So I'm going to try to articulate this in a succinct way, which, by the way, I'm not very good at. I'm verbose.
It's okay.
All right. So ultimately, what's the underlying foundation? So when we look at this, we think about this first. For all manufacturers, let's just get the baseline. Technology is an enabler. Your goal as a manufacturer is not to be a technology company. Your goal as a manufacturer is to manufacture goods. And so when we take a look at technology as an enabler, then I like to say, when we start this conversation, let's take technology out. What are we trying to get done? So there's business processes. You and I were just talking, you're a big process person, right? So many manufacturers in the United States are 80 to 90 years old. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but 42% of all manufacturing in the United States are done by companies that are over 60 years old, right? We are the second largest manufacturer in the world. So even though we think that we don't have manufacturing, now, to put it in perspective, South Korea, Japan, United States combined are still less manufacturing capacity than China, but we're still the second in the world. So the United States has a ton of manufacturing, a lot of family-owned manufacturing, a lot of legacy manufacturing. So now what you have is you have these business processes, and a lot of these business processes have existed for, like I said, 80 years. All right, so 80 years ago, you weren't really using technology. So we still got to find the customer, you still got to present a quote to a customer, you've still got to fulfill for the customer, et cetera. So now you're introducing digital touch points. So the first thing that I'd say foundationally, and this now is going to sound kind of like motherhood and apple pie, but it's data. So you have all this data in your organization. So we like to say you have data that powers your business, and there's data that powers your decision making for your business. So when you talk about data that powers your business, it's your product data. your customer data, your order data, and then all the derivatives thereof. So foundationally, to be able to deliver any of these digital experiences, and again, this is motherhood and apple pie stuff. Anyone that's working in this space knows this already, so we can even dive deeper into what it takes to make this better and how this can be done better in 2025. But the data is the core foundational element. All the software packages that you see out there, like Salesforce, like ServiceNow, like Oracle's packages, like Shopify, they're useless without your data.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And getting real, it doesn't have to be anything related, to customers, clients, but the people you talk to in the industry. How many people do you think are doing that internally, making data such a priority?
So I'm biased. Most of the people that I work with are over $1 billion.
Yeah.
So I want to give them all credit. They're all thinking about it, and they all have data initiatives. I do not know of any $1 billion plus manufacturer that has not already gone down this path. And the most common place is like product data, right? Product data is the lifeblood of manufacturing, right? It is how they, from their PLM systems and actually designing their products and all the different attributes of their products, and getting those things manufactured, and then creating a digital twin of that product, whether it's going to be in your CRM, in your commerce. Product data, as an example, is huge. Now, in the $100 million to $500 million range, I'll say that they're thinking about data really cleanly. But especially if you're an older company, like we've done some work, for example, with alcohol distributors, okay. Right? A very kind of closed group system. They've been running their businesses for 100 years, right? It's very heavily regulated. They haven't done much with their data. I mean, we're looking at it, and there's a lot of bad data. There's a lot of data that's just sitting in multiple silos, things that we wouldn't say is what you should be doing today. So I think it depends.
This is exactly why I asked, because if you're watching this today or another day and you're below that threshold and you're already feeling, you hear someone like you offering that advice, I don't have that yet, and you're talking about this level of valuation for or revenue for a company, you don't have to feel so bad, but how can you get there?
Well, and I feel for people, right? Because we're in this kind of mode that when you're making an investment, you want to be able to say, this is what I'm going to get out of the investment. And it's kind of like when you're building a house, how much work are you actually putting into building a really strong foundation, the stuff that nobody's ever going to see. But the stronger that foundation, you're going to have the ability to build a 10-story house, even though you start off with a 2-story house. And that analogy, I think it drives, because it's also very hard once you've built the second story and the third story to go back and work on the foundation. Yeah. And so data is very similar historically. We'll talk about this because AI I think is changing the game. But when you've got bad data, it's really expensive to go in there, and expensive meaning time consuming. I don't know what expensive means to people, but relatively speaking in a tech, it takes a lot of work, and it's expensive. And at the end of the day, it's something that you never see. It's like, okay, I fixed my foundation, or I've got a bad foundation, I've got a great foundation. I can start seeing my house sway a little bit. Now I fixed it. For the people looking from the outside, you didn't do anything. You just spent a ton of cash, but the house just looks the same. And people aren't willing to make that investment because people are like, wait, I need something flashy here. I need something that's going to drive something for me. And it takes a little bit of a longer term thinking. We just heard, a number of the speakers talk about what's the long term and what's the short term. I heard Shema talking about it, right? Shema was like, are you thinking about next month, or are you thinking about 5 years from now? And unfortunately, data is not 5 years from now, but it's like a year, 2, 3 years. The benefits are going to show up downstream.
Okay, I like that. I mean, and there's always the, bright, shiny object syndrome. What's happening in the news cycle, the new tech. I know that there's a push for manufacturers to sell directly through e-commerce right now.
Yep.
If we're talking about tech stacks and infrastructure, traditional business model, e-com business model, where should people be?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I think depending on, again, what the product is. We've got clients that produce gaskets. I don't think they're going direct to consumer, right? But we also have clients that produce radios. Definitely have a direct to consumer. So I wouldn't consider, so I think there's a ton of great now product out there, like SaaS products, Shopify, Salesforce, that allow you to spin up a direct-to-consumer site 10% of the cost of what it would have cost 5 years ago. The challenge, though, for most manufacturers, and I think this is where you need really strong partnerships, is, well, what does it take to actually run that business? How to ensure that my clients are getting what they want? Because now think about it, right? If you are a manufacturer, let's take that, I'm just going to make something up because I don't want to offend anybody. I'm a manufacturer that produces paper, right? I typically, if I've been producing paper for 100 years, I'm a US manufacturer, I've got everything nailed down, my supply chains, how I'm getting my trees, blah, 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 blah. I don't have anyone in-house that runs e-commerce, right? That's not my specialty. So what do? They typically go out, they look at Gartner, again, hi Gartner, right? They look at who are the top 3 providers of e-commerce. They're like, all right, I don't know anything about e-commerce. Gartner says these top 3, I'm going to bring these top 3. They rely on these top 3 guys to sell them, and then they rely on the top 3, whoever wins the product, to bring in a partner. And then that partner, maybe good or bad, you have to evaluate it, right? That's the stream of consciousness. So ultimately now, once you've now stood up your Shopify site or your Salesforce site, who's running it? Who's operating it? Who's knowing what changes to make on it? That's actually the big lift. It's not the, okay, how do I stand up a website?
Yeah. I mean, so let's talk about the buyer, right? Because we're talking about the sites that people are experiencing. There is a contradiction happening, right? Because people, or let me ask that as a question, is there a contradiction of B2B companies who are expected to provide B2C like shopping experiences or services to close or reduce that longer cycle? Yeah,
well look, we're already in the age, I think 70% of all B2B buyers are of the digital age, right? So they're 40 years and younger. And they're what they call digital native, right? They grew up on digital. So let's just throw that out now, right? Everybody's used to buying online. Here's the thing though, I will say that I think I agree that people want a more B2C-like experience, but I don't think it's in the way that people think. And what I mean by that is, you go on to some of these websites that are more direct-to-consumer sites, that are brand sites. They're beautiful, right? I mean, beautiful imagery, really clean workflows. It's the amount of time and effort, rightfully so, that goes into being on brand is intense.
I always say I'm easily influenced.
Right?
I go to these sites, I'm like, yes, I don't know what you're selling, but that looks great.
Exactly. And we call this the propensity to browse. They want you to engage with their website, to understand their product set, to engage with the brand. B2B isn't that way. B2B buyers are like, I need to get in and get out. I'm trying to buy 19 radios for my department, and I need holsters, and I need to get provisioned. I don't want to spend a bunch of time looking at what else you have, right? So in that sense, I think what people mean by a B2B, B2C experience is, I want a digital experience, i.e., I love John, my sales rep, and I'll call him or her for the more complex purchase. But honestly, I'm kind of dreading because I don't want to talk to John. John's going to try to sell me 30 other things I don't want. So I want a digital experience. But I don't necessarily want my brand experience that I'm looking for when I'm buying my
car dealership mode, where I'm like, I'm not bringing my car in because I don't need all the 10 things, but I want the one, make it easy.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I love that. All right, I feel like we need a drum roll because we're going to start talking about AI.
Let's do it.
Here it comes.
Yeah, all right.
I didn't have the sound effects, guys. So, hype around AI manufacturing, probably an understatement. I know you and I offline talked so much about what we're doing, and those of you listening are probably already down the rabbit hole, or at least curious if you're here. Where are you seeing AI actually delivering results? Where do you think it could? And where are people really missing the mark?
I might have to ask you to repeat that. Let's start with the first one, which is?
Where are you actually seeing results?
Where am I seeing results?
It can be a company that you know and love.
Sure. The low-hanging fruit with AI, now that we're entering our 3rd year of this journey, right? Definitely customer service. And what we're calling, not so much replacing customer service agents, so you're starting to see that too. It's more around what we're calling call center deflection. So can I go onto some digital screen and have a really intelligent agent, AI agent, service my request? Hey, where's my product? Can I return my product? How do I return my product? I'm having this issue with my product, etc. So call center deflection is huge. More internal, 100% tools like GitHub Copilot, tools like Cursor are heavily streamlining development. Now, hopefully no enterprise is vibe coding their way into a production environment, but there is a ton of efficiency being driven by AI-assisted coding. So coding and customer service, I think, are two really low-hanging fruit that we're seeing wide adoption everywhere.
So part 2 of that is, what are we not thinking about right now? Like, what do you think is coming down the pipeline?
Again, motherhood and apple pie. You turn on any YouTube video, you talk to any kind of pundit, they're right. Agentic is coming down the pipe. This concept of one AI controlling multiple AIs, that's coming down the pipe. And how that impacts enterprises, we'll see. Side note on that. Well, no, we'll come back. I've got another thing I want to talk about.
Fine.
But yeah.
The third part is just, where are people missing the mark right now based on what exists?
Yeah. Well, for number 2 and number 3, and then we'll go back to the side note. I think a big area of opportunity that is just starting to get explored. We talked about data, right? We talked about how data is the lifeblood of these organizations to be able to produce these digital experiences, but also just to power businesses. I had also said that it's like fixing the foundation, and it's really expensive. So a lot of people are just like, gosh, I got to make the investment, but they kind of like hold their nose and do it. Where I think a lot of people aren't aware yet, but I think they might be by next week, this stuff moves so fast, is the ability to leverage artificial intelligence to actually do a lot of this data work for you. So there is no analogy here because there isn't some gee whiz tool that I know of that can go in and fix your foundation. So now the analogy stops, but now imagine if there was. So we're starting to see a lot of tooling that is starting to be applied for what we call getting your data AI ready. And so this could mean, just on a very high level, cleaning your data. What does cleaning your data mean?
Just dust it off, little things.
Yeah, exactly, that's it. You've got a customer record across 3 systems, and one of them says, Sarah.Evans, the other one says S.Evans, the other one says Sarah Evans, one word. Having AI go in there and normalize that. Before, that was a really complex thing, really expensive, hard-hitting thing. There are now cleaning tools that we're leveraging to be able to go out and clean the data. Context. So what do I mean by data context? So I think most people are familiar with Excel, right? Excel could be used as an analogy for databases, right? You've got these rows and columns. And in these columns, all these columns have a column name, right? And a lot of times, you can imagine, I had mentioned, right? Most companies in the United States that are manufacturing are over 50 years old. These column names that have been created over the last 50 years, they're not the most user-friendly, right? They weren't thought of like, okay, I need someone to be able to come in and understand what this column is. So context is, can I give context to the data? So if I have a column name that says FN, well, what does FN mean, right? But then you look and it's Sarah, Rohit, Allison, Jacob, whatever. Oh, FN must mean first name. That historically is really expensive to do. But we're starting to see now AI tooling come out where you can really give your data context. Why this matters? You can't, just like how I said data powers all your customer experiences, data powers AI. And if you don't have context to the data that you can give to the AI, it doesn't know what to do with it.
I feel like it models some of, if you're using AI at all and writing prompts, context is one of the 4 things you have to know anyway. You're already doing this. So I feel like use your personal knowledge too.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So I love a good stat. I'm going to throw out one more.
Yeah.
So research is suggesting right now that 90% of B2B buyers would switch to a competitor if their supplier's digital experience fell short. We're talking about AI, we're talking about technology, and now this is a benchmark?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this.
Well, I'm going to push back on your data again, right? And what I mean by that is, again, I think it's nuanced.
Okay.
There's a lot of, I think, if that was written as 90% of all buyers would switch if they could, right? Because the digital experience is bad, is a true statement. So here's how I explain digital experiences. It's not going to take you from here to there. What I mean by that is, it's not going to, a good digital experience is not going to help your business grow 10%. A good digital experience will stop it from shrinking by 50. Think of it as a moat, right? The second you have a really bad digital experience over and over and over again, they're going to start looking. So that's why I'm like 90% will start looking. The example I was going to give, because I said, hey, trust is earned in drops but lost in buckets, right? Shout out to Marcio, Netshoes, for giving us that one.
Thank you.
But imagine that you're a buyer and the website says, and this is critical because you're a distributor and you've got planning and you've got customers, that you're going to get something in 22 days and it's going to cost this much. But there's supply chain disruptions and it takes 44 days, right? So now expectations are set that it says 22 days. And a lot of times the data is not correct in the background and it might just seem like a small thing, but it's huge, huge impact. So that's a really clear example of a poor digital experience. Another one is if you've got really bad search, right? A lot of manufacturers aren't selling one or two items. I've worked with manufacturers that have 7 million SKUs. But definitely most manufacturers have either customizable SKUs or tens of thousands of SKUs. If you have a really bad search experience and you can't find the product, that obviously is another one of those really bad experiences.
So reduction in errors across the board, right? If you're dealing with 5,000 SKUs, 32,000 SKUs, I don't even know how many the smallest big box retailer has. What are all the areas that we have errors? Not even talking about digital bad experiences, but just
errors? Yeah, it comes back to that product data that we're talking about. That's why manufacturers invest a lot in product data, because ultimately the errors are just missing data, right? So if you're buying something and let's say you're a roofing manufacturer and whatever slates you're selling don't have the right dimensions in the PIM, the product information management system.
Who's identifying that? Where does this come out? Where you're like, I did this and it seems like a common sense thing, and you're like, who missed this?
It's not that someone missed it, right? So let's talk about a really common thing that happens. These companies that have existed, like I said, they're over 50 years old. Guaranteed 90% of them, and this is not a real stat, but I'm just making this up, but at least 90% has been this is a combination of multiple companies that have been purchased and merged over the years. So now anytime you have a merger or an acquisition, you've got different systems that, again, were brought together by roofers, right? If I was my roofing manufacturer, they're the best roofers in the world. They have not really given a lot of thought how to merge product data and how to make sure that they're calling the same thing. So bad data is like an evolving thing, right? We call it tech debt in the technical world, like just bad builds upon bad builds upon bad. So yeah, that's what you're seeing here.
So what needs to happen culturally for that? Because it sounds like data silos too, right? But something has to happen internally to marry all of these.
Yeah, I think it's at the top. At the end of the day, you've got to have agency to have the ability to go in and invest in fixing these things, right? There has to be an ability and a willingness to invest. If that's not there, it's not going to fix itself.
Why do you think people aren't investing?
What we talked about earlier, right? There's a lot of competing priorities. We opened up this conversation with just all the stuff that's now flooding people, tariffs, AI, all the stuff. And by the way, that's on top of running a business. So before AI, if we had this conversation, I was going to say 21, that's not a good idea because of COVID. If we had this conversation in April 2019, no, we would not be saying, life's easy, there's nothing going on, manufacturers aren't talking about anything. No, running a business is always hard, right? And then there's the more standard stuff. How am I going to grow my business? How am I going to cut costs? How am I going to invest my capital? So this is on top of that. But people are still running their business. And so why aren't people making the investment? Because they've still got a lot of competing priorities for those dollars. And now when you have additional things like tariffs that could be forcing margin compression, they're going to be thinking even more. And I want to bring this up because I don't want it to get lost. When I asked my colleagues yesterday, what are you doing about tariffs? And this matters, and we'll tie this all together. 9 out of 10 of them said nothing, right? They said nothing because we don't know where things are going. But it's not totally true that they're not doing nothing. They're not doing anything about tariffs. Here's something they have done. They've paused future initiatives because they've said, I don't know how much margin compression I'm going to have to absorb, so I'm putting some non-essential projects on hold. So even though they're saying they're not doing anything, as we dig a little bit deeper, they are doing something. They're pausing spend, which is a downward spiral. We talked earlier about positive flywheels. Uncertainty about what's going to be happening is going to lead to a slowdown in hiring. It's going to lead into a slowdown in CapEx expenditures. It's going to then further lead to right? It's a downward spiral. So we do need to kind of address the elephant in the room at some point that, yeah, Tariffs may or may not affect our clients or manufacturers, but it is impacting their ability to spend, which will cause short-term pain.
So, all to say that there's a lot of priorities, there's competing priorities, and very much to put you on the spot, if you had to give your advice today, as things stand, on how you would encourage manufacturing leaders to think about maybe their top 5, top 3 priorities, how would you rank them?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, everything comes down to profit and margin, revenue and margin, right? So everything that you're doing as a company, if you're a for-profit company, is to optimize either on revenue or margin, which is cost.
Yeah.
So I would, keep it simple, stupid. I would go back to first principles and say, what are my biggest challenges in either growing revenue or lowering costs? Where am I the most inefficient? And I'd attack those. One of the things that we've been telling our clients, for example, is when they're like, I don't know what to do with AI. And the conventional wisdom, and I think these are both right, by the way, and I'm not trying to be kind of like duplicitous, but I'll tell you why. Take the smallest thing possible and see if you can get it done with AI. I think that makes sense at the individual contributor level. So if you have individual contributors in your organization, encourage them, taking into account privacy and whatnot, to experiment and tinker and leverage AI and become the most effective and efficient individual contributor possible. We talk about that all the time internally. Do hard things, right? Do harder things, like challenge yourself and be better, and take what you're doing and figure out, how can I automate the boring stuff so I can continue to focus on the hard stuff. That is not the advice I'm giving at the macro level. When I'm talking to CFOs, I'm saying take your 2 biggest line item expenses in your business, reverse sort it. So take all your expenses in your business, reverse sort it from most expensive to least expensive. Take your top 2 or 3 most expensive line items. And again, because we're talking about manufacturers, guaranteed those are your oldest processes in the book. Decompose those business processes and then look at where AI can help you actually automate your biggest processes, because then the spend is going to bring the ROI.
Okay. I mean, I love that, and I love being a professional tinkerer. I think that's how I'm going to refer myself with AI, because you're always experimenting and trying new things.
Yep.
What have you been most excited about? Manufacturing, yes, we're talking a lot about AI, but what excites you personally about AI or the opportunity?
Well, I'm a tech geek, right? So me personally, just to kind of give context for my answer, I love technology and I love doing hard things. In my professional lifetime, right? So I've been in this space now for about 25 years, technology, large-scale enterprise, and helping large enterprises leverage technology to achieve their business goals. We have seen, and this is what's so amazing about this timeline, right? In my professional career, the internet came out when I was in college when we started having internet adoption. So that predates my professional career. But in my professional career, we had the advent of mobile, right? We had the true advent of software as a service. And now we're getting AI, right? And so these are huge disruptive opportunities that are happening in the world. So what I love about AI is about tinkering with it and ideating with it and trying to do hard things with it to make meaningful impact. So what are we doing? So we have this initiative internally that how can we make our products 50% better with AI, right? That's our internal goal. It's like, if it takes, for example, 6 months to stand up an e-commerce site, how can we do it in 3? How can we make ourselves that much more efficient? And I think that's the promise of AI. What you showed me today, right? I mean, I don't want to put her on the spot because she's shy about this stuff, but I think you were using what, Gemini or what? It
was Gemini and Claude.
And Claude, right? Like how to build a staffing model that you put in all your prompts, and now it's like, okay, you had this slider that said from 0 to 30 clients, this is how many That's amazing.
So I don't have to, really the answer is because at the end of the day when I do that process stuff, I'm so tired. Right. Anything that I could make mistakes with my brain, I need to make sure I have that foolproof. But
now look at the mindset shift, right? In your company, potentially doing what you just did, historically what happens? Really brilliant people like you might say, okay, I need to get this done, but I've got these 30 other things I have to do, and this is more going to be an efficiency gain, so I'm going to get to it, you'll never get to it. Now with AI, you're like, let me just tinker.
Yep.
And maybe within 3 hours I can get it done, because I don't have to put aside 30 to 40 hours anymore. I can just put aside 2 to 3. And that's what I'm saying. As an organization, if you do nothing else with AI, set the culture that make your individual contributors use it. Encourage them to use it.
Let me ask you this, because I've talked to other folks, maybe people who are a little tech adverse.
Okay.
And I do listen to them, and I like to hear what they say, because I'm very much an advocate for doing this. They'll say, when is enough enough? How fast do you need to be? Is tech moving too fast? Are all these things happening too fast? You want 50% more efficiency. Is that the end game, or is that just that's what's available right now? Do you ever think that way?
No, because you and I were talking about it earlier again, and sorry to reference all these off-camera conversations, right?
A lot.
But just in life, I mean, I would say that about money, right? People are always the next level. I need to make more. I need to make more. Okay, I think there's a conversation there, like, when is enough enough? With tech, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. No company, unless you're a software company, exists to produce technology. Technology is an enabler. So how much technology you use is going to be directly a derivative of what are the business goals you're trying to achieve. And if you can't talk about what technology if you can't answer the question, hey, what's the business goals you're trying to achieve with this tech? Then it's too much, because you're just now aimlessly installing tech. So I don't think it's ever enough, as long as it's toward the cause of some business goal, some business event.
I really like that, because I feel like all of the research that I've done in your space, and you obviously know more than me, is really tech-oriented.
I don't know. I haven't built anything like what you built, so.
I'll share it offline. But things like changing the B2B buyer experience, things like people expecting Amazon-like services. What should companies, where is the actual gauge for what we should be looking for in the B2B space with tech?
Yeah, what you just said, I just want to be clear, is a trigger for me.
Okay.
When they say, I want an Amazon experience. When customers tell me I want an Amazon experience, my answer is amazing. Good news, they've spent $14 billion over the last 8 years on their experience. Give me $14 billion, I'll build you an Amazon experience. We have to be cognizant of what we are trying to do, right? And be really clear on what it takes to get there. It's kind of like you and I were talking, super proud of my kids. I've got an 11-year-old. She's amazing at soccer. But I'm
like, how amazing?
No, we'll talk about that later. I don't want to put her on the spot. But I'm not going up to her and be like, hey, you did good, but I need you to play like Messi. I mean, it makes no sense, right? I mean, why would I say that? I mean, I don't want to offend anyone. He's the GOAT. And so I'm not asking my daughter to be the GOAT. I'm asking her to be the best of what she can be, given her constraints and where she's playing and how she's playing and how much time she has, etc. Same thing with when you're talking about experiences. Be really cognizant. Go to where your customer is. Do your customers need to have an Amazon-like experience if you're selling 9 things online? Probably not. In fact, most B2B customers, they're not even trying to buy online. They want to view a quote online. They want to pay an invoice online. They want to take a look at their service scheduling online. They want to schedule a service online. It's not even about buying, right? So I think we kind of skip 3 steps. We need to be really aware of what our customers are looking for and then deliver to the customer.
So I actually didn't know Amazon experience was a trigger for you, all this aside. Where do you think this is coming from? Is there a media narrative that's sparking so many companies to say that's what they think they need to do? Is it looking at profitability of Amazon?
I mean, Amazon's an amazing company, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to have Amazon and be the Amazon experience? They are.
What's the realistic
I mean, look at how many people use Amazon. I use it daily because they make it so easy. But ultimately, Amazon, and they do have a B2B site, but Amazon's a B2C organization. They have optimized to the nth degree. By the way, primarily on supply chain. This is a great conversation about, study it, but all their online experiences would be pointless if they didn't have, let's say, the country's best, at least, supply chain. And they invested so heavy into that so that the front experience could be great. I mean, really go on to Amazon and look. It is not a pretty site. right? It's not beautiful. No one would say, wow, what a beautiful experience. It's the most functional experience you can probably get in a B2C site in the United States.
My children can use it.
Yeah. Search it. It works. Add to cart. It's there from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Which is
easy.
Amazing. When I grew up, you had to wait 7 to 14 business days.
Yeah.
Something, dating myself. Rohit, we've talked a lot about, what's happening right now, a little bit of, I think, historical data, and this is a big question. But if you and I were sitting down in 5 years from now having this same conversation, what do you think we'd be talking about?
Oh, boy.
I know, make you think.
5 years from now.
And if you're listening and have an idea, drop it.
Yeah. All right. What do I think we're talking about 5 years from now? If it's going to be in the context of our conversation today, it should be the same what with a totally different how. What do I mean by that? What we should be talking about is how am I going to maximize revenue? How am I going to optimize gross margins? As a manufacturer, that is what you should always be talking about. What you're really then talking about is how. So the name of the game today is tariffs, right? How do I optimize revenue and margin given the constraints I have around tariffs? How do I optimize revenue and margin given what's going on in AI? It doesn't matter what the how is. You will adapt 5 years from now. It's a generic answer, but I think it's so core to what I truly believe about business, right? The world's greatest companies are the ones that are keeping their eye on the prize. How do I optimize revenue? How do I optimize margin? I'm keeping my customer in mind. What do they want to buy? How do I give them the experience that they want relative to my competition so that I can be number one? And then the how is just like, oh, what's the technology out there? What are my constraints out there, et cetera, and you overcome them.
For those, I always have a goal of wanting to be number one. That's
okay.
A fatal flaw, right? But most of us are not. Most companies are not.
Yeah.
How do you still maximize and be the best number 2 or the best number 3 or the best number 10?
Yeah, I look at this, so what we talk about in our company is we summarize it with the tagline, do hard things. Okay, what does that mean? Because even that, if we're having a real conversation, and I think we're gonna pop open some wine after this, we can talk about it then, but if you are, I'm just gonna say, if you are running a spaceship company, what is hard there is very different than if you're running a hardware store. Now, you talk to that hardware store owner as a business owner, the person that says that person's not doing something hard is ridiculous. It's a really hard thing what they're doing. Is it at the same level of hard of building a rocket ship? No, but what I'm talking about in terms of kind of innovation required to do that. Now, so when I think about hard things, I look at it like this. This is my simple formula. Are you an N of 30, an N of 5, or an N of 1? So it's not about being number 1, number 2, number 5, number 30. If 30 companies can deliver your product in a similar price point with a similar quality, you're not doing hard things. So it's relative to your customer. So if your hardware store looks like every other hardware store in the city, and you've got the same products at the same prices with the same customer service, you're not doing hard things, in my mind. Of course, running that business is hard. But now if you're challenging yourself, like how do I improve my customer experience? How do I make my stores cleaner than everybody else? How do I organize it in a way that I can get to the products faster? Whatever that might be for you, that's what I like to say, play in an N of 5. You know, if you can only point to 5 other companies in the world that can deliver your product at your price at your quality, you're doing it right. And then if you optimize on that, it takes a little bit of luck, you might be the N of 1, right? But that's how I look at it. N of 1, N of 5, N of 30. Do hard things.
I really love that. And thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge today. I feel like this is very timely, obviously relevant. The speakers today have been phenomenal. I'd love to hear more from you on a regular basis. Go forth and be awesome. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, everyone.